All right, folks, so we're gonna get started. So this session is a continuation of the previous track, which was around case studies around consumer deployments of passkeys. And I had the great privilege of meeting the folks from Branch a few months back when we did a webinar together. And I was actually really fascinated by this use case because I'm not gonna tell you too much about it because that's what our wonderful speakers are here to do, but this is a really, really interesting case of like a B2B to C kind of a case, kind of a use case and how to address that with passkeys. And so please help me welcome our speakers today. We have Nick Aralin and Arkadiy Goykhberg from Branch Insurance speak with you about their deployment of passkeys.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Arkadiy Goykhberg. I'm a CISO at Branch Financial.
Hi everybody, mic check. My name is Nick Aralin. I'm a software developer at Branch Insurance, and I was the developer responsible for most of the implementation of this project.
So I thought for our session, we take a little bit of a different approach. We'll look at the more of a broader interaction of authentication with other elements of security architecture, as well as business processes that may affect. So we'll look at the business drivers for this specific effort, how we thought about requirements and navigated build versus buy decisions, some of the decisions we had to make during the migration, and how we thought about project scope and blast radius of this change, and some of the outcomes and lessons learned through this implementation. Given this audience, I don't think I will need to spend a lot of time on compliance and security and why strong authentication is important. We are a regulated entity, so we do have a requirement for 2FA. We did have an existing implementation which leveraged SMS for 2FA and had a myriad of problems, I'm sure you're all familiar with, mostly related to telco issues, which would impact the user experience of logging in and frequent outages. Of course, it had additional issues related to security account takeover, bot, and all other security considerations. Because it's a B2B environment, we also had a large number of password resets calls into our agency help desk. When we were considering our implementation options, we really wanted to present a modern user experience to our end users to keep up with the image and the brand. So we were very careful in making sure that user experience of leveraging our platform is great. So we had to partner with product to deliberate all the possible options. We also partnered with our privacy team to help this effort would help in their managing of opt-in, opt-outs, and all other privacy requirements as part of us redesigning the user profile section. And were, of course, other non-functional requirements which we had to consider with respect to, again, collecting analytics and integrating with existing services within our identity stack, such as Segment, Datadog, and so on and so forth. Pass it on to Nick.
Thank you, Arkadiy. So I'm here to share with you the implementation journey and to go more into technical details. So there were some decisions we had to make before we could make the migration possible. And one important decision that we were discussing was about managing risk, and it really boiled down to whether we wanted to do a phased rollout or do a cut over. So meaning replacing the old system with the new one right away. One more decision that we had to make was what authentication methods to support. We knew right away that there were some authentication methods we didn't want to support, obviously passwords, because we were deprecating them and we had no intention of keeping them around. And as Arkadiy mentioned, we also had existing implementation of SMS one-time passwords, and they proved to be problematic. So again, we didn't want to support those. We also wanted to give users a choice. We wanted to support some FIDO authentication and have a fallback. So at least we wanted to have two choices for user to authenticate with. All right, one more decision was about how to migrate users and how to specifically migrate from a single tenant setup to multi-tenant setup. Our existing solution was based around Cognito, and in Cognito we pretty much had all users in one user pool, so we had a single tenant setup. There were some issues for us to do the migration to the multi-tenant setup, and they were revolving around user data. We were allowing users to sign in with usernames or emails, and a lot of times users preferred the usernames. That led us to having part of users having incorrect or outdated information on file, and email specifically. And there is a second issue with that, which was we had users with duplicate emails because some agencies were reusing emails for multiple users, and we had to solve that before we moved to the new solution. So the way we solved it is we launched a campaign before the migration when we made sure that all users that we migrate had unique emails. Pretty much we just had a model where we would say that we're preparing a migration, or like there's going to be a change, so please make sure that you provide your up-to-date email so you can sign in easily in the future and have no issues with that. And that helped us a lot. That helped us a lot with, first of all, verifying that all the users that we migrate, their emails are real, valid, and can be used for authentication, and that they are unique. So we solved these two problems. And also the solution that we chose, which was Dscope, allowed us to build a custom form for our authentication, really a custom experience of what data we wanted to collect from the user. So we also had an opportunity to verify other information we had for users, such as first name, last name, phone number, daytime phone number. We collected information like whether or not they want to opt in for marketing emails. You can really collect anything, any information from the user this way. So this is what we did. One important, really important thing that we had to make sure we get right is how we consider the blast radius, and the approach that we take would directly depend on that. And there were really two choices. It boiled down to whether we wanted to replace our existing solution completely, as I mentioned before on one of the earlier slides, or we wanted to integrate the solution on top of the new solution on top of the existing one. So just add another layer on top of the existing solution. And now I just want to share some considerations that we have with you for those of you who are in a similar position. So I'll just mention that again. Our existing solution for authentication was resolving around Cognito completely. As some of you might know, Cognito has limited searching capabilities, meaning that specifically in Cognito, you cannot search users by custom attributes. So we had to solve it by having dedicated indexing logic for that will be updated on a regular basis. If we were to replace existing solution completely, we would have to touch this logic and change it and adapt it. We also had some downstream analytics and specifically 5 train pipelines that were Cognito dependent. So again, if we wanted to replace the solution, we would change that as well. Initially, we used AWS Amplify authentication widgets for users to sign in because it was easy, just works out of the box. And once after user signed in, their session would be managed by Cognito. So again, if we remove Cognito, we got to change that as well. And lastly, our authorization model was built around Cognito completely. Cognito has user groups, so that's what we use. Because again, at the time when we were setting it up, it just was easier to bootstrap. So if we were to remove Cognito completely, we would have to change that. And that's pretty sensitive stuff. So there were issues with that. Now, if we take a look at the points for integrating the new solution on top of the existing one, there are other things to consider. So if we were to do that, we would have to maintain user data and permissions in both systems at the same time, both in Cognito and in Desktop, which introduce an overhead. We would also have to do it in a way so that Desktop is source of truth, because you got to have just one source of truth, right? And that leads us to the third point, which is we would have to come up with a logic to actually sync data from Desktop to Cognito, ideally on every sign-in. And that means that if there's any discrepancy in user data between Cognito and Desktop, Desktop would prevail. So like when users sign in, data from Desktop would be promoted to Cognito and overwrite whatever we had in Cognito. The first solution, the left column, it's a huge blast radius. Authentication is a pretty sensitive part of any system. So we wanted to reduce the risk of failure as much as possible. And to touch all these things in the left column for us was not reasonable. And it wasn't necessary, really. So that's why, considering all this, we went with the choice that made the most sense, which is just introduce another layer on top. And later, if you want to deprecate the existing layer, you can do it at your own pace and your own time. So just again, made the most sense. We went with this solution. Also, Cognito is real cheap. So we didn't incur any significant expenses by keeping it around. So again, just generally made more sense. Now, we had big ambitions for this project, but we had to scope it down to some V1, to some first version. And let's discuss what it was for us. Enabling FIDO2 authentication was definitely in scope for V1. That was something that we wanted, and we decided to deprecate passkeys in favor of easier, more streamlined authentication experience for our users. As Mayor mentioned in the previous speech right before us, before the break, if any of you were present then, turned out that most of our users had devices that supported passkeys, which was really great news for us. And then it just made sense to, one, enable passkeys, which, as you can see on this screenshot, is a Touch ID in most cases, whether our users used MacBooks or Windows laptops. But we also wanted to have a fallback. As I mentioned, and as Mayor mentioned, rightfully so, you got to have a fallback, because something could go wrong with passkeys. You could have users with devices that don't support passkeys. You got to have a second option. So for us, we decided that it would make the most sense to implement email one-time password. And as you can see on this screenshot, that's how the choice looks in our UX. So first of all, in our UI. First of all, you can see that there are two options because this device does support Passkey. So even if your device supports passkeys, you would still get a choice. For whatever reason, you might not want to use passkeys. We discussed the adoption rates in a lot of other conversations on this conference. So it's cool if users have a choice. Also, if your device doesn't support passkeys, you would not see this option at all. We would default you to email one-time password. So after you enter your email and click sign in, you would already see these 6 boxes to enter 6 digits that come to your email, right? All right, let's move further. What we also had in scope was support for SSO, and there were 2 moments about this. First moment is that we knew for sure that we wanted to enable SSO for internal tenant, meaning branch employees. We were using Okta, and we were using it for plenty other apps and services that we use in our company. So we wanted to make stuff just one of these apps that we use Okta to sign into. But we also wanted to make it possible for our biggest agencies who might also use some user directories. We also wanted them to have a choice and to be able to implement their own SSO providers into our solution. This was in scope of V1, and the solution that we chose, Desktop, supported that, so checked. And one interesting thing is dev environments. Not only dev environments, environments in general. Our company is heavily invested in the cloud infrastructure, and every developer in the company has their own AWS account that's isolated from all other accounts, which means that you can do anything you want there, right? You can mess with your users, change your Cognito configuration, try something new. You don't have to worry that it will affect anybody else, and even more so production. We wanted to achieve the same flexibility with this scope, right? Because we didn't want to lose this. So in the scope was to set up a dedicated developer environment for every developer in our company, and to make sure that they're nicely integrated in their AWS stack in a reusable way. So you can just scale, so you can just spin it up, spin it down. Should be as seamless as how it was before with just pure AWS. We also wanted to have a logic, a mechanism to propagate changes between environments. Because imagine I'm a dev who works on a feature, and I'm ready to merge it. So we had to have a way when these changes are merged to propagate them between all environments so that everybody's on the same page, right? All the environments are in sync. And lastly, and I guess that's an obvious point, but still I'm calling it out there, we wanted to have a separate dedicated production environment, which again, Desktop provides, and that's just an easy thing to do. Yeah, this is a quick screenshot of how it looks like. All that I just described, it's possible to do with YAML templates, and then you can just deploy it with CloudFormation, and that's how you bootstrap a dev environment. So all Desktop resources, they will be defined as AWS resources in your CloudFormation, basically. At least that's how we did it. Really convenient and slick.
So just to jump in, so the solution supported both low code, no code, kind of like on the screen workflow configuration, which you can quickly iterate on. Once you're happy, you can export it as code, check it in, and then promote it to all other environments.
Yeah, that's a good point. The scope has a convenient UI where you can do this all manually. But obviously, when you have a lot of developers, you don't want them to go and set it all up themselves. So this is the automated way to actually do it in a centralized way, so that you have just one template, and then you can, spawn as many instances of that, right? Does it make sense? And one thing that we also wanted to have, and as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to reduce the risk as much as possible. So we wanted to have some backdoor, some easy way to fall back to Cognito if some bug happens or some downtime. And that's really applicable to any vendor that you might choose. So what we wanted to have is, we wanted to have an easy switch mechanism, and we wanted to make it possible by environment level. Because what if some dev environments would like to use the old way, some environments would like to use the new way? We wanted to have flexibility. It's really about flexibility. Okay? Now, some edge cases that we encountered or just realized that they existed. And I wanted to share them with you. So the first issue that I personally encountered was incorrectly linked users. And if for whatever, actually let me take a step back. What does it mean? Since we introduced Desktop as another layer on top of Cognito, that means that this scope was IDP in Cognito, identity provider. That also means that every Cognito user that authenticates with the IDP, they will have the identities array where you basically have all these identities. And users theoretically could use multiple IDPs. Users could sign in with Google, with Okta, with like really a lot of things. You would have all these identities here. So the edge case for us was one of them, is that if for whatever reason you got incorrectly linked users, the only way to fix it would be to delete the IDP user and recreate it, because the idea of it is already there. And it will, whenever you try to sign in again, it will keep the link until you delete the user and recreate it again. Just something to call out, not a big deal though. One issue also that we encountered, and this is completely a Cognito limitation, is OIDC timeout. So again, since we introduced Desktop on top of Cognito, we had to establish OIDC connection between Cognito and the IDP provider, which is Desktop. So Cognito has a hard limitation, which is 5-minute timeline since connection established and when it expires. That means that if you already established it and user took longer than 5 minutes to authenticate, they won't be able to finish the process, and instead they would be redirected to this small box that you see on the bottom, which is a default hosted UI of Cognito. There is a way to mitigate that, a pretty slick and convenient way. What Desktop allows you to do is you could initialize the widget with a predefined email. So the way we did it, you could design your own UI component that replicates the Desktop styles, and there you could just have an input for the email and a button like sign in or whatever, right? Some submit button. You could initiate this OIDC connection only when user provided the email and click the sign in button, which ideally indicates that user is active and they're like serious about signing in right now. And that's when the timer will start. Because the way we did it initially, we initialized the connection on the page load. And what we realized, a lot of times, users might load the page and then go to the kitchen, make some coffee, or jump on a call, discuss some business, and get back in 20 minutes just to see this default UI, which is bad experience. So just a cleaner way to do it would be to have your own widget that replicates the styles and initiate the connection only when user actually clicks sign in.
Just to jump in, Nick, the major use case where that happens if user get distracted, especially if they're using email OTP, right? You typically could get interrupted because you switch windows, and I feel like this is the use case that really would not be as prevalent if we had higher adoption of passkeys, because the passkey login only takes a few seconds. So once you hit the login page, the passkey user gets pre-filled, right? You log in, and the entire interaction is usually under 10 seconds. You have less chance for the user to get distracted. And if you're using email OTP, you need to switch windows, you need to copy and paste passwords, you need to maybe wait for the email to come in. There is like a higher chance for the user to get distracted and encounter that OIDC timeout. But in any case, that's a condition which you need to catch and manage as one of your edge cases.
Yep, thank you. And the last edge case that I wanted to call out, again, I don't think that's a big deal, but just something to keep in mind. We wanted to keep Cognito as a fallback option, and what we realized is that when we create users, we create a Desktop user, and we create Cognito user, and you gotta assign some password to Cognito user, right? And even though users will be authenticating with Desktop, their Cognito users would have a random password that ideally they have no idea about and they have never have to use them. But if then at some point you switch back to Cognito, users won't know their passwords. So it will be a requirement for them to reset the password before they can use Cognito again to sign in. So if you're in the same situation and you're designing this fallback scenario, you could have a call out in the widget, something like, please reset your password before you can sign in, just to make a better user experience, really. And so that's the last edge case from me. Jump into the lessons learned and results.
Thank you. So the bigger lessons was like really establish a coalition, build good relationships with your product team, with your help desk and customer support team, and with your communication team, and manage change, including in involving all stakeholders. We took an approach of staged migration, so we did it wave by wave. And each wave required like a campaign to be run to notify users that the change is going to hurt for them on a specific day and get them ready. So that introduced overhead for the comms team, for the help desk team, for the developer team. We really didn't experience many failures or many escalations during that migration. Especially initially, we started very small in the batches of like 100, 200, 300. And we did, I think, around 11 batches in terms of migration. We would have saved ourselves some time and overhead if we just accelerated and maybe done it in 3-4 batches. So like, don't be afraid if the escalations or user failures are not significant, probably a little faster. Another one was enterprise SSO adoption. So the vision was that we could introduce a lot more self-service and reduce the overhead of manual account creation and increase speed of onboarding. But the customers were not really jumping on to enable SSO as quickly as we would have hoped. We did realize the value of call reduction for the password resets. So again, measure everything and check against your expected outcomes and see if you're reaching your goals. There is a lot of lessons here on how to increase Passkey adoption, which we'll learn at this conference, which we'll try in our own environment to go from 25% into hopefully high 60, 70% adoption. One thing to realize is like set your expectations for the industry. Our insurance agents use other insurance companies, and they're used to certain workflow, and that workflow is email OTP. And we're probably one of the first insurance companies to adopt passkeys. So I'm hoping as other carriers adopt passkeys, users will be enrolling more often instead of skipping the, pressing the skip button. So that's pretty much it for us. I know we're out of time. We'll be available to answer any questions outside of the room or in the corner of the speaker area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arkadiy and Nick.